goes forever. Charge it once every 3 months or something.
Do you remember where you were?
Yeah, we were talking about the economic benefits of community-led planning as opposed to trying to build a response capability, because it's clear that the response capability is strictly limited in this part of the world and always will be. Our best bet in that regard is to bring in out-of-area people when we need them. So in terms of building a capability within the region, building a response capability that can deal with everything is just not going to happen. On the other hand, if you look at the building of the resilience and harnessing the resilience that already exists in our rural communities, we can certainly achieve quite a good bang for our buck in terms of the investment that we make in time and money in building these things and coordinating them, in facilitating them, and in bringing them through the community-led planning process into the development of community safety groups who are quite capable in their own right of looking after things in their own communities with a little bit of support from us. But from an economic point of view, it makes a great deal of sense for us to do that. We are under-resourced in that regard at the moment. That, I think, is something we need to attend to in the future. We need to bring our paid staff fully into line with this concept. We also need our volunteers on board with it, mostly because our volunteers can help us to develop these things. Our volunteers themselves are members of those local communities, and so some of that relationship building stuff that I talked about earlier on is already in place with them. But when we get these community safety groups up and running and when they're functioning, it's our volunteers who are going to interact with them much more than the staff. And so it's very important that our SES volunteers are on board with it and part of it. So that's, I think, a very crucial way forward for the service into the future from here.
We got to KEX. Is that the bit you just did then, or?
Yeah, Community Engagement Coordinator is, as the role is currently described, well, we don't have enough. That's very clear, that the geographical area of the Murray and Murrumbidgee regions combined is far more than can be reasonably dealt with by one person. Even supported by a crew of volunteers, it's still more than you can cope with. We're under-resourced. We need to actually pay attention to that, look at the future, the way forward, and make sure that that's resourced adequately. So I think it's an area where we need to make some investment in the not too distant future.
What else we have?
We talked about resourcing of these groups.
Did we do that on this tape or the last tape?
We did it last time. I might just say a bit more about that.
Well, what about going again from the top? So like, because I know we went in from we did the groups, and then we probably should have found out where we left off.
Yeah.
You want to go back and see if we can find out where we left off and sort of go back and revisit it? Or?
I'll just tell the story again. If you've got several versions of it, you
doesn't matter. I'll just take whatever.
Yeah. We talked about the idea of what's involved in setting up one of these things and resourcing it through to its logical conclusion. I think the first thing is about that facilitation. It's about building the relationship in the first place and then quietly facilitating, keeping that group on track as they discuss what they need to do in order to keep their own community safe. So they're developing their own plan at the local level. We'll have a small group of people from that community who are involved in doing that. And generally what we're going to find, and what we have found, is that those people are already there. They're the people who naturally assume the lead when something happens in that community, and who the other members of that community naturally look to for that leadership and coordination. Those are the people we're looking for. So we get them together, we coordinate, we facilitate, we don't direct, we don't tell them how it's going to be. We just gently guide them to the development of their own plan. We can assist them with administrative stuff, we can help them with producing maps and that kind of thing, which they can then use to integrate into their plan. We can come up with the plan on a page, which ends up as a big sign down at the bus shelter or something like that. Those are the sorts of things that we can do to support them through that. Once they have a plan, of course, you've got to test it. And there again, we can assist by facilitating an exercise for them to participate in and to test their plan and to make sure it all works and to revise it if it doesn't. The community is not in a position to be able to facilitate that kind of thing for themselves because they all need to be playing in the exercise. So it makes sense for us to facilitate it. That kind of thing also helps us to keep that close working relationship with them and to help build that relationship of trust, which is so important between the community and the State Emergency Service. So once they've got their plan, they've done their exercise, what becomes fairly clear is they need a few things. A stash of sandbags is the obvious thing. They may well need some of those around town where they can actually build a little sandbag wall, keep water out of properties, that sort of stuff. Okay, so we need that. It would help too if we could actually identify these people in the community when there's something going on. So give them a tabard, give them a hat, something like that. We need to make that available to them. They're going to need communications of some kind or another. The obvious way is probably through handheld portable CB radios. Very lightweight, very portable, quite cheap too. They've probably already got quite a bit of that sort of stuff, but if they haven't, that may be something that we can assist them with to make sure that they do have it and it's available to them when they need it. So there's a fair bit of stuff that could be useful in one of these community safety group type environments. Where are we going to keep it? Well, how about a half-size shipping container that we actually paint white and we put a big SES logo on it and we put it somewhere in a fairly obvious location, somewhere near the centre of that community. That's a continual reminder to them that the service is there to support them, and it's also the obvious place to put their plan on a page where they can come down and have a look and make sure that they're familiar with what they need to do when something happens in their community. Not a very expensive proposition to do that. Not only that, but these things are relocatable. You can move them around if you want to. So I think that's a really good way to actually have a visible presence in some of these remote rural communities, to have a stash of gear there and to have a group of people in the community that know what's there and know what to do with it. So a big advantage, I think, for us and a win for the community as well if we can bring that about. So in terms of supporting them into the future, it's really about keeping the two-way dialogue going. We need to know what's happening in that community. They need to know what's happening with us. There's information going back and forth. And once in a while, every year, at least every year, we're going to facilitate an exercise for them so that they can test their plan, make sure they're familiar with it. And if it needs to be adjusted in some way, then that can be highlighted and taken care of. So it's really not, once it's up and running, it's not a major investment in time or equipment or anything else, but it's just a continual keeping in touch, keeping the communication going, keeping it two-way. And I think that's obviously, from experience over the last couple of flood events in the west of the state, that is what our communities actually want from us.
Let's talk about when the SES is operational now, we'll talk about this room. How the benefits of having these established network connections in the community. So when we're talking about public information, for example, then we say, right, this is the situation, we're already operational, this room's up and running. You've got your volunteers in here who are going to be our liaison between the two, so probably maybe say this is a role for a region headquarters liaison group. Mm-hmm. But looking at it from the point of view that we now have a direct line into these communities, so we have a better understanding that our warnings are actually in the community and are actually targeting the actual people at risk. Because, like with Quinty, they're going out and actually telling the people who are going to get affected exactly what's going to happen. So when they say people, because we always say, we did not know. And this is how we can actually say that. So with an information stream coming out and the information stream coming in, and how you see that being fed back into situational awareness.
Okay. All right. So let's talk for a minute about how the SES in the west of the state responds to and manages a flood event. Where we have community safety groups in our part of the world, we're instantly ahead of the game. Because we have the relationship with those people, we have a trusting two-way communication between SES and the community. We can feed them information, and what's more, we get information back from them. So immediately our situational awareness is far better than it would be if we didn't have that relationship. That puts us in a great position to actually know what's going on and to make operational decisions. We tend to operate with our incident management teams based at a regional level in this part of the state. Now that may or may not continue, but wherever there will be an incident management team, and within their area of operations in this part of the state there will be some of these community safety groups with whom they need to work. If I talk for a moment about the Murray region, the way we would manage that would be to have our region headquarters volunteers fully across the community safety groups that we have out there. Some of our volunteers will be involved in that personal relationship with those people out there in those communities, so that they're known and they're trusted. And as time goes on, more and more of our region headquarters volunteers will be exposed to that, so that it makes that two-way communication work exceptionally well. We're able then to listen to what the communities are telling us about what they need in order to keep themselves safe, keep out of trouble, basically. They're giving us information about what is actually impacting on their community at that time. So that's valuable information to an incident management team, to know how a flood is behaving in a particular part of the world at a particular time. It's gold. The other thing that we can do when we're talking with those communities is we can work out whether we need to issue a warning product of some kind, or whether we need to issue an evacuation order, perhaps, for parts of or all of that community. Now, it's my firm view that the decision to issue an evacuation order needs to come from the community. They need to recognise the need for it and to ask for it. It's not something that the SES or anybody else should be dictating to those communities, because we know from past experience that when we do that, the response is generally two words, of which the second is off. It's not going to work if we try to issue that kind of edict from a central location, from a remote location outside of that community. So the decision-making process has to be theirs. In dialogue with us, of course, we can make suggestions, we can offer them information, we can give them hints perhaps, but the request for an evacuation order comes from them. We then issue the order. And because that community has its relationships internally within the community, that when that order goes out, we know that it's going to reach the people who really need to hear it, because the community itself will make sure that they do. So it's going to be a lot more effective than what we've been used to in the past. There's also a much better chance that people in the community would actually comply with an order issued under those circumstances. But even if they don't, the existence of that order then gives them some leverage with their insurance companies after the event. They understand that there's a benefit to them in having it out there. So we avoid all of that confrontation that we've seen in some of the flood events over the course of the past 2 or 3 years. What else have we not talked about?
I think we've covered just about everything.
I think so. I think what I want to get through is that this is the way of the future, at least in the west of the state. We didn't actually say too much about translating this over to the east coast.
All right. I will do that, and then what I want to try and do then is we'll try and look for about 2 sentences, a soundbite, they call them sound bites.
Yep.
I can actually chuck in a soundbite, like maybe it'd be good for introducing a topic. So when we're going into setting up a group, like we might go for a 1 or 2 sentence, snappy little bit. We'll look at how to set one up, how to maintain it, the value to the SES, that kind of thing. We might just think about, see if we can come up with anything pithy, which is sort of like, not smart ass, but sort of community resilience is, I was going to say is the future, is now the reality.
Yeah.
Responding, just like that, so we can get a 1 or 2 sentence, sort of like a soundbite, where we go, we can't put this off any longer. This is what we need to do. Now is the time to act, and we've got to this has got to become a core belief of the SES, something along those lines.
It's got to be part of the way we do business going forward.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Julia Gillard used to say "going forward" all the time, didn't she? I think I really want to quote her. Yes. We'll cut that. Yeah.
Okay. So East Coast.
East Coast. Well, I've been talking so far about the west of the state, and particularly the Murray region, which is the part of the world that I know best over here. Some of the concepts we're talking about in terms of building community resilience are translatable across to the east coast as well. Communities over there tend to be different, but they do suffer from a number of issues, particularly in the flood categories. The east coast of Australia is well known for its flooding in those east coast low events where we get tropical depressions coming down out of Queensland, thanks to our cousins north of the border for that, that drop a lot of rain in a short period of time, and we get those floods that come through. They generally don't last very long, but they do cause a lot of problems over on the coast. And so communities over there need to be able to look after themselves in the same way as our rural communities in the west do. The other nightmare scenario, of course, along the coast is the tsunami, which may or may not give enough time for people to react, but certainly wouldn't give the response agencies, notably the SES, very much time to set up and to do very much about it. And so it's really incumbent, I think, on our communities to understand that hazard and to be resilient in the face of it. So building a community safety unit is going to be a slightly different concept, I think, perhaps on the coast to what it is out west, but the underlying principles remain the same. It's about engaging with that community. It's about getting them to recognise the hazards that they face and getting them to come up with their own ideas and their own ways of actually responding to that to keep themselves safe as possible in the face of that particular hazard. It is translatable. I'm not so sure how we would approach that, not having any experience of doing it, but the feeling that I get is that certainly along the coast those communities do exist. There are individuals within those communities who naturally take the lead when something happens. And so it's not beyond the bounds of possibility to engage with those communities and apply the same principles.
Let's talk about what you think it would look like to be a community safety group member. So in other words, it's an invested interest person. He's not going to go outside of his street to help. He's basically just helping his street. He's covered by a very occasional membership